You're listening to the Gabe Molina Podcast.
I already messed up.
It's all right.
I still watch my feet while my head's in the sky. If I tilt myself forward, I know I can fly. Just a few inches above the ground is all that is needed to blow past the sound of promises, broken dreams, regrets and lies. Shake off the shame and leave them behind. Daddy, I know that you tried to tell me that I'd have to grow older before I could see that the world would use everything I had to give, and I'd have to grow colder if I wanted to live in comfort, contentment, quiet and peace. But you knew that these never satisfied me. Mama, you tried to teach me to live like the Holy One's daughter, and I heard you, I did, but I had to find out just what was out there. I knew it would hurt, but I just didn't care. And I loved, I lived, and a part of me died, and you were always waiting each time I cried. So take a rest now. Do you realize we're several years older and some of them wise?
That was super beautiful.
Thank you.
Claudia Quintero Moseley. I said that right?
Yes.
All right, cool. That's a beautiful song.
Thank you.
What is, what is the song about? I mean, I get it, but where did it come from when you were writing it?
It came from several years of not writing songs, and so
Okay.
it's not what I envisioned my next song that I wrote would be, but it's all that I could muster, and I obviously have not memorized my own words yet because I have to still look at my pages.
That's perfect.
I wrote a lot in my younger years, and then I put it down for a very long time. So this is my trying to come back to it.
What was your hiccup? What kind of kept you away from it? Was it anything in particular, or were you just preoccupied with other things? Because you're an artist as well, so people know you do all kinds of medium.
I'm a visual artist, yes.
You're my favorite visual artist.
Thank you. It's nice to have
all my art in the
you
house
and my
is
mother
yours.
Have all my art.
Me and your mom just keep spending money trying to buy up all your art.
Well, I'm going to start putting your names on the tags when I show the work, like in the collection of.
Oh, really?
So that you guys will get some credit.
Oh, that'll be
for
cool.
your efforts.
That'll be cool.
But yeah, to answer your question, A lot of this, all of that actually, distractions and other projects, getting degrees, trying and failing at life and succeeding sometimes, and grief. A big part of it was grief. My father was my songwriting partner, and he died in my late 20s, and I wrote a slew of songs about him and never did anything with them, and just kind of stopped writing for a while because I didn't have it in me to do it.
A lot of people don't know this about me, but every now and then I'll write some stuff. And I'm not a writer by any means, because I think a writer can sit down and write, right? And I don't feel that I'm capable of that. Like typically, when I'm able to write, it's because I'm in an extreme emotional state, and it's weird because it's not like I'm trying to go, man, I'm really emotional right now. I got a lot of things going on. Let me write it down. It's almost like having a cup that's too full and you got to pour some of it out, right? And so like I don't write often, but every now and then when I do, and there's times where I'll write it and I'll get rid of it, because some things are extremely personal, and some things are like, I heard a guy say one time, I forgot where I heard it, but he said, say it, forget it, write it, regret it, kind of thing,
Yeah.
And so like for me, it's kind of like, well, some stuff I'm like, okay, I got that out. Let's get rid of it, and some stuff I keep because, I get to a point where it's like, okay, well, I wrote something, and I don't feel like it was a complete thought, or like what I wrote wasn't complete.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, in an odd way, I still am carrying that emotion, right? And when I still carry it, I feel like what I wrote isn't complete because I haven't gotten it out of me completely.
But is any thought ever complete? And I mean, that's what all of my songs are, just portions of thoughts that, like you said, are floating around through time, and every now and then they hit me again. And something comes back, and it's okay. I recently unearthed, and I'm not exaggerating, literally a stack this high of partial songs that I wrote.
Oh, really? From like your whole life?
From my late teens to now. And
how was some of the late teen stuff?
it was seriously bad. It was terrible.
It's like, Bobby didn't talk to me at church day and I hate him, kind of thing.
More like, I thought I loved you, but I never knew. Things like that. And
Hey, that was impactful back, in your teens.
yeah, and it contained so much, and you were trying to do what good songwriters do, which is to contain a lot in a little, but I just wasn't mature enough. I hadn't really lived through this stuff. And some of that is addressed in here. My dad would tell me things like, well, you can't really write a good song until you've been hurt a whole lot.
Yeah.
And he said it really matter-of-factly, and so I tend to get very black and white with things like that. And, well, I'm just going to give up, Dad, And he would say, no, that's not what I'm saying. You just need to live. And he was, of course, correct, But actually, one of the reasons I wanted to sing this song was not just that it's the first song I've written in years, but
song.
this first partial verse has to do with my time at what was B County College, where we met.
Yeah.
And
I'll tell everybody about that story.
I won't say anything about that.
I will.
But I had this dream. I was very awkward. I had been homeschooled since the 3rd grade.
And you weren't just homeschooled. You were homeschooled in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, we lived in a tiny rural town.
Yeah.
And I'm not mad at that at all. I thought it was amazing. I think my mother's amazing. We weren't part of a religious cult. We weren't part of a.
That's what everybody in town was saying.
We didn't do things. Not that if that's your thing, that's great.
Sure.
But Mom just did things her own way. She just wasn't happy with the education system in our town, and she wanted to try and do it better. That's really simple as that. But I didn't have a whole lot of social interaction with my peers. She tried her hardest to give us social interaction, but with my peers, it wasn't exactly possible a whole lot. So I get to college, and I'm just completely lost with how to talk to people. So I'm talking to people the way I talk to people of all ages, and I don't know anything about being cool.
What was that? Well, let's stop real quick.
Okay.
And what was that? Because I knew you then, and I know you now, and there's been tons of progression.
Am I cool yet?
You're pretty cool now. I saw you shoot today. But for somebody that grew up that way, and I'm not saying that like, oh my God, you grew up that way. But nowadays homeschooling is totally different. Like there's these co-ops.
It's different now. So different.
It's way different. So you were going, and not that B County was a big college, right?
No, but I came from an even tinier town.
Right.
So it was big to me.
What drove you to go to that college? As far as like, because for me, I mean, it's easy enough for somebody to go, I've never been over there. I don't need to go over there. I'm just going to live my life the way I've always learned. So it kind of takes some balls to go, hey, I'm going from one extreme to another, and I'm going to be around a lot of people all day, every day, and being in the dorms, like there can't be that much privacy in the dorms. No. And so for somebody coming from homeschooling out in a really rural community to go into a larger town, to a college, what kind of got you to do that? Because it's scary. I would think it's scary.
It was very scary. The number one motivation was, I wanted to go to college. I always knew that I wanted to. And Beeville was cheap.
Yeah.
And I got the Pell Grants to go, and they had dorms. And the reason I needed a dorm was we lived 45 minutes away. And my mother, after raising us as a single mom and homeschooling us for years, was finally going to do something for herself. And she had gotten into a junior college in Dodge City, Kansas for equine sciences, which is her dream.
That's cool.
And I knew that was her dream. And I'm not saying, I was selfless. I was scared as hell. And I didn't want my mom to leave the state, but I knew she had to. And my grandparents were nearby enough to where I could go there on the weekends, but I had to find a place that had dorms that...
I hadn't realized your mom was gone.
Yeah, she was gone my first year of college, which after being homeschooled, in a tiny town with very little outside, other than our core people, it was really scary.
Sure.
She also didn't have a phone while she was there, and I didn't have a phone because that was the 90s. And,
it was the 1900s.
Yes, it was basically pioneer days, and I didn't have a cell phone yet. I mean, I remember my roommate had one of those big blocky ones, you know, but I didn't have
the Zach Morris cell phone.
I remember my mom had told me, here's the numbers of the people I know here. If something happens, call me. And I called her once, and it was not for an emergency at all. It was over a guy that I was upset about. Yeah. And I was just brokenhearted and upset, and I didn't know what to do. It was someone who was pursuing me, and I didn't want him to pursue me because I didn't like him that way. Yeah. And I didn't know what to do.
Wait, this wasn't me.
No, it wasn't you.
Okay. All right, just making sure. We're going to cut this out of the podcast. Well, go ahead, continue since it's not.
Anyway, it was totally not an emergency at all. But she was, I'm calling Kansas, these people I've never met, and they go find my mother somewhere in Dodge City, and they bring her to their house, and she talks to me for an hour. And it was...
They were like, a boy likes your daughter. You need to call her immediately.
So from a payphone. I was talking to her on that payphone. I don't know if you ever went to the dorms there, but there was a sad payphone down at the bottom.
What did your mom say to you? Did she tell you, don't call me again?
No, she didn't. She said, it's going to be okay. She let me cry. And
she's called the cops?
She said, you know how to carry yourself and how to present yourself to people, and just don't waver from that, and be strong in your convictions of what you want and what you don't want. And it was all good. And
did it get better from that point, or did it take a little while?
It got a little better.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Anyway.
Well, I'm going to bring up my story.
Okay, but hold on. So, really quickly. So during that time, I was kind of just, I didn't know what to do with people my age. I just didn't. I didn't go to high school, so I didn't know how to be social and be cool. And I didn't know what was in, and I didn't know what was out. I learned a lot of what was out because it was things I did, things I said and things I did. So I had this dream, and I've been doing a lot of paintings based on dreams lately, and I'm remembering old dreams. And I dreamed while I was there in the dream, I was walking along the sidewalks on campus. You know how it was all interconnected sidewalks, and there were lots of ridges where, the ground had shifted and the sidewalk was broken, and, you had to watch. So I was always watching the ground. It
definitely wasn't Harvard.
Like if you didn't watch the ground, you'd trip. If you didn't have it memorized. And so I was always watching the ground. And in the dream, I was doing that, and I was so full of like self-consciousness. Like I was just always felt like people were thinking, that's that homeschooled girl that doesn't know how to do anything. And I was like, I really wish I could fly right now. And in the dream, I thought, oh yeah, wait, I know how. I've done this before. And all I have to do is tilt myself forward about 30 degrees, and I'll lift off the ground. And I did, and it worked. And I wasn't really flying, I was just gliding, but I was off the ground about that much.
Like an Olympic skier.
Yeah, and it was like in the dream, I remembered a technique that I'd learned somewhere else. That was the technique. And it was like a freeing of, constantly looking at the ground and keeping myself hidden and stuff. Didn't solve a whole lot in my life, but it was a little bit of relief. So that's
did it help you with your confidence? That dream, like, it sounds like you spent a lot of time staring at the cracks. So
yeah,
were your dreams kind of something that kind of enabled you to kind of reevaluate what you were doing from a different perspective?
My dreams are still constantly evaluating what I'm doing, reevaluating and reevaluating. I mean, that's what our subconscious does when we're not busy thinking of other waking things,
Yeah.
Helps us figure things out.
So what's the name of the song?
Some of Them Wise.
Okay. And it's an original.
Yes.
It's beautiful.
Thanks.
Now, you're, how can I put this? You've come a long way. This is the first time I've ever seen you play a full song. And you know where I'm going with the story.
I do.
So when I met you at B County, just so people know, you were a little introverted, hair, and we were both in the same art building. And so I think I'd already met you in art class, right? We were taking art classes together.
Yeah, we were.
Because I needed electives or something. And
I think I met you my first semester there.
Yeah, and we were in art class and maybe in painting or something, or maybe charcoal. I can't remember. But it was funny because that's when I saw you on the bench with I think it was a black guitar, wasn't it?
I think so.
Yeah. You're sitting up there strumming it. And so, like, I've kind of lived the entirety of my life being a big, fat, scary Mexican, right? So it's funny because I'd recognize you from class, and so I walked up to you and I said, hey, wow, you play the guitar? I was like, can you play something for me? And I know you dispute how this turned out, but I swear you packed it up and hauled ass to the dorm. So in reality, I know you sit there and you think when you're walking around that people are looking at you and going, oh, that's the weird homeschooled girl. But in reality, they're like, that's the girl the fat guy tried to attack.
No, they're not.
So I think you were just seeing it from the wrong perspective.
I didn't get up and haul ass back to the dorm because
did.
I would never do that. I'm a polite person.
You had your rape whistle in your hand.
I did.
And you were hauling ass back to the dorm.
I would never have been that rude. I don't think I would ever have been that rude.
I think that's exactly how I remember it.
Okay, well.
But in hindsight, we turned out to be great friends.
Yes.
And it took some doing. I think a lot of times, we grew up very different. You grew up there in Myersville and homeschooled, and I grew up with.
Actually, I grew up in Taft.
In Taft,
yeah.
Okay. And I grew up in George West, in a house in a town full of assholes. So that's kind of my niche. That's my wheelhouse. So it's funny that I think the entire time that we were at B County and afterwards, and you'd gone off to school in some other places, and I feel like we were just very similar, right? Because again, I like to be a little artsy, And it was nice to kind of meet somebody, because you were deep in art. You know, art was your life. It was in your blood. And it was something that I dabbled with in private because I didn't want my buddies and siblings to make fun of me, you know. So I think among other things, you know, you're a good person, you're good to be around, all that other good stuff. But I think in the beginning that was something that was kind of appealing to me because you were awkward, and art was your life. But at the same time, I enjoyed life, but I was a little awkward in it too. Or art, I enjoyed art because I was a little awkward in it too because I was hiding the fact that I was in art. You know what I'm saying?
You were.
So it was kind of like nice to hang out with you because I was like, she's not going to call me anything bad for wanting to draw.
No.
Which my friends would have been like calling me terrible.
Actually,
names.
I regret to this day, you gave me a drawing that we did in drawing class. We were doing charcoal. You know, it was like a brick wall, and there was you did all these black stick figures climbing up it.
Oh, yeah, I do remember that.
And you're like, you can have that. And I was like, awesome.
And then you threw it away.
I got distracted, and I left class, and it got thrown away. And to this day, I regret that. Because
you know what? That's the one piece I thought you still had.
I have your painting.
No, but this hurts more.
I'm sorry.
You know what? I'll draw it for you again.
Please do. I still regret it. I mean, I think after we left the classes, the custodial came in really fast and cleaned up because we got charcoal all over everything.
Yeah.
So it got thrown away, and I was really upset. But you gave me a painting. Do you remember?
Mm-hmm. It was When Love Leaves You, and it spelled evil.
It's love spelled backwards. It spells evil. And I'm like, what is this about? You're like, that's what love looks like when it leaves you. And I was like, oh.
You see how artsy I was? I wasn't even listening to The Cure at that time. Could you imagine if I was deep in The Cure?
Oh my goodness, yeah.
I was very fortunate that I didn't get into The Cure till I was in my late 20s. Because I think as an early teen, early 20s, I don't know that I had the mental capacity to really understand it and enjoy it. I would have been super emo and weird. And anyway, I will tell you this. I don't know if you know this, but I was also 1998 Best Supporting Actor at B County College.
Best supporting actor?
Best Supporting Actor.
Best supporting actor.
In the drama class.
You were in drama too?
Yes, girl. I was in a play and everything.
I didn't know that.
Oh, I was super into it. I really enjoyed it.
What play was it?
Man, I forgot what it was, but I was a cop. And
awesome.
And it was funny because I was working at the jail.
Yeah.
So it was like, oh, it's perfect. I just won't cuss. But you went into art. You ended up going to school in Memphis. Mm-hmm. Got your master's?
Yes, my master's in fine arts.
In fine arts?
Mm-hmm.
And then you ended up, you came back to Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And now you are living and working in the Myersville and Victoria area. And,
mm-hmm.
and you're still involved in art, but it's a different kind of art. But one thing I wanted to get into a little bit about, I don't want to get too deep into that kind of thing, but one thing that I find fascinating, and you're going to be a good source of this, is I love Texas history. So one thing I want to get into a little bit, and I'll make fun of you a little bit more later. Okay. But I kind of wanted to touch base with you because you went to the bookstore today. You went and bought a bunch of books. Mm-hmm. I learned about anime through you.
Please don't say that.
What is it called?
Please don't say that.
I know, it's not anime. What is it?
I was explaining the difference between graphic novels and manga.
There it is.
Manga, however you say it.
I don't know what the second one is, but I know graphic novels now.
Yes, I appreciate cartoonists and independent comics work. I always have. Yeah. And I like it when it's genreless. I mean, it's just about whatever the artist seems to want to illustrate. It could be having a bad day to a monumental period of history to what they think their cat is thinking. You know, it just spans the entire genre of human existence and experience, and I love that people are out there doing that. I'm a painter, so I make single images, right. But I really respect people who can make sequential images containing the same characters and a continual story, because writing is hard for me. Songwriting is different than writing, right. You know, and people who can do that and continue an artistic style all the way through in the length of a book is really impressive to me.
One thing that I've always enjoyed about you is you're extremely articulate, and you can describe things in a manner that not only inform but kind of provoke thought. And when you were explaining that to me earlier and showing me the books, the first thing that went through my simple head was, oh, it's like a taqueria menu. There's a little bit of writing and a lot of pictures.
A lot of pictures, yeah.
So I guess me, everything's food-based. But one of the books you bought was a Texas history book.
Yes.
From like the 20s or something.
Is it Texas and Mexico? Was it the Texas and Mexico wars or something?
Yeah, I think it was the Texas-Mexico War.
Yeah.
Which, is that the war that kind of led to the Alamo and Gonzales and all that? Or is that a different?
It's one of the wars. I mean, I'm not an expert on Texas history. Sure. I'm learning myself. But what I am learning is that it's far more complicated than most other states. And I'm sure every state has their thing. But Texas went back and forth as different entities so many times and with so many players involved. It's kind of mind-blowing that we are what we are now in such a strong, united, I mean, for the most part, united state.
Well, as long as the Californians stay out, it's united. So that's not happening.
Yeah. I mean...
Is that, when you're talking about the different forms, is that like the Six Flags over Texas kind of thing? So who do you remember who that was? I know wasn't it French, Mexico, Spain? Who else? Was the Republic of Texas?
Yes.
And then U.S., I'm assuming there's one more.
Yes, the U.S. flag, and there's one more.
I don't remember.
What? Confederate flag.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's right, yeah.
Okay.
So that's the six.
So, I mean, no other state really matters when it comes down to it. Texas is the best, and that's all anybody needs to know about.
Well,
but I guess throughout its short, well, I say short, but through a time period there, I don't know how many years that would be. A lot of conflict and a lot of battle, on top of everything with the Native Americans and the Comanche and
right. But I mean, and they were being used by all the other flags for their own causes. Like Mexico was pushing the Native Americans to do what they wanted them to do, and Europeans were coming in, settling, and pushing the Native Americans to do what they wanted to do, and the Native Americans were doing what they wanted to do, so essentially.
What was the Spanish and Mexicans trying to get them to do?
Keep the Europeans out.
Oh, so that was the purpose
Mexico
of it.
Spain wanted this territory too. You know, and
I guess that's
Cabeza de Vaca was the first European to really walk through this area. He didn't claim it.
And he was Spanish?
But, I mean, Spain says that he claimed it, but he didn't start any settlements or colonies or anything. So the French were actually the first to make a colony in what's now Texas. It didn't work. It failed.
Where was it located, do you know?
In Victoria County.
Oh, it was in Victoria.
Yeah.
And that was the French?
Yes, that was the French. La Salle.
Okay.
Robert Rene Cavalier, Sieur de La Salle.
Yeah, that's fancy.
If I even imagine if I could actually say things with a French accent. But he was looking for the mouth of the Mississippi because France had very successful holdings and colonization and land up in Canada, and they controlled the northern mouth of the Mississippi. So they were looking for a southern port, a warm water port, so that they could just trade all the way through the United States. And
what year is this?
This is in the late 1600s, so
Okay.
1680s. He got here in 1685.
Okay.
And he was funded and allowed to do this through Louis XIV, the Sun King, the longest running French king, you know. And he said he was looking for the mouth of the Mississippi and went 300 miles off his mark and came to Matagorda Bay instead. Now, some say that was accidental because of the quality of the navigational tools and his own hubris, but some say that was intentional because he knew that Spain was down in Mexico having great success with silver mining. So the clue that we have towards that is that there was a whole lot of offensive weaponry on his wreckage and in his colony, you know. So it's kind of like, yeah, you weren't just coming here make a colony, you were ready to blow down
Fight
some
for some
doors
land.
and stuff.
So let me ask you this, because I don't know if you'll know the answer to this, but when people were navigating the seas or the Gulf back then, let's say, LaSalle's looking for the mouth of the Mississippi. How far off the coast is he sailing? Is he sailing in a manner that he can still see land, or is he sailing in a manner where there is no land to be seen? Like, is he out in the middle of the Gulf sailing? Because to me, it's real friggin' hard to miss the Mississippi Delta.
Yeah, I think he was out in the middle of the Gulf.
Okay.
And I mean, he had to have been. The Gulf isn't that big to where he would not have ever seen land. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, he would have had to been pretty far out in order to not see anything.
But you know where the Mississippi's coming out, and I had seen something maybe on History or Discovery Channel, where at one point they had diverted, I think, the Mississippi River somewhere in Louisiana, and so it kind of changed the way the Mississippi Delta was. But I mean, that compared to Matagorda Bay is like huge difference.
It's like an ocean compared to Matagorda Bay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know much about nautical navigation, especially in the 16. Actually, I probably know more about it in the 1600s than I do now. But all we have to go by is basically his scribe, his journal person, whose name was Joutel, Henri Joutel, and he wrote everything down. And so he was transcribing what was happening, and that's what we have to go on. That's why it's like, well, did he intentionally miss it? Did he not? Did he? Because he'd already found the Mississippi and gone down quite a ways. He'd found the Ohio River and the Mississippi, and he'd marked all that out. That had already been, how do you call it?
But he found it from the Canadian side?
Yes.
Okay.
And he traveled down pretty far south.
Gotcha.
So he felt pretty confident he could find the southern port coming from the other way,
Well,
instead of down from Canada.
I wonder what would be the purpose of that. Because it sounds,
Trade.
Well, it sounds like if you're already going down the Mississippi, why wouldn't you just keep going till you hit the Gulf?
I don't think he had the manpower or the supplies. I mean, so LaSalle was a character that was, he came from a rich merchant's family. He had money behind him, but not a whole lot. And I think he was kind of the renegade son that really wanted to explore, but he did the things that his dad wanted him to. Like, his brother joined the J-suits, so he tried to as well, but he got kicked out because they were like, yeah, he's just too hard to handle.
What is J-suits?
It's an order of priests.
Oh, gotcha.
And all he kept asking them, well, send me to these countries so I can go be a missionary. And they were like, no, we're not going to trust you with that. So I think he really wanted to go explore and have adventures. And he was trying really hard to justify that. Now, this is all my opinion.
Right.
I'm just from what I've read about him, that's how he translates a little bit to me. Like, he really was an explorer at heart and wanted to go have adventures. And some of them just didn't work out.
Well, I would imagine.
So he started down. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I mean, just to kind of build on that, I would imagine at that time period, if you weren't exploring, what were you doing? You're farming, and
right.
What else is there?
Well, he had gone up to Canada where France already had a lot of land, and he had some success with colonizing parts of it, or being a manager of the colony, But he wanted to discover his own things, and forge the new paths and get the glory for that, And however much of it was for glory or for just sheer adventure, I have no way of knowing. We don't know, but he wasn't content to. He was success. He could have stayed up there in Montreal and been a successful landowner, and probably been quite wealthy, but he wasn't satisfied with that. He wanted to do more. And when you were talking about him coming down, like, I think he had to raise money to do those things. He had to raise money to travel, and he didn't have the funds or the people, because you had to have guides. You know how many different tribes you'd have to go through, and territories you'd have to go through just to get down that far. I mean, he had to have people that would guide him through not just the land, but through the Native American territories, so we wouldn't get killed.
Well, I was just hearing you talk, and I'm thinking about it, and I guess to try and come all the way down the Mississippi, there is a lot of opportunity for bad shit to happen.
Yeah,
right.
Really bad.
You're
shit.
Constantly having people shoot at you or fling arrows at you, or if you're gonna try and stop on a bank somewhere, whose territory are you in? I don't know. So I guess in hindsight, going the long way through the Atlantic and then into the Gulf was a little bit safer.
It was more of a direct line. Plus, like I said, they knew that Mexico was had been occupied by Spain since the early 1500s. So they knew where the other European power was, and they were trying to sidle in. And
how old was he, LaSalle, at this time?
At this time, he's in his late 30s.
Oh, really?
Because he died in his very early 40s.
Oh, wow. So it was shortly after. He died, I guess, down in this area?
He died around... So skipping a whole lot, things weren't working out with his colony, and he kept taking trips to go find the river, that he missed the first time. And finally he was like, F it, I'm going to walk to Canada. So he started walking to Canada with a few men, and there were lots of disputes already because things had gone so wrong. A lot of his men just weren't loyal to him anymore. But what's recorded is that there was a dispute over food supplies because he had his nephews with him and some random men, and the other men were angry that the nephews seemed to be getting more of the food.
Oh, I see.
Than they were, and so one of them shot him in the back and killed him, like around the area of Nacogdoches.
Oh, really?
I think it's right, Nacogdoches, somewhere in northeast Texas.
Well, I don't know. This is just speculation, but oftentimes I think, when we kind of talk about worst case scenarios and nowadays and preparing for things, we always talk about prepper type things. I always kind of go back to, what happened 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And I get that you need money. I understand that you need to pay your men. You need food, you need supplies. But at a certain point, I would imagine if you're exploring an area that you have no idea of what's there and you're mapping this out, there's got to be a point where you've got to be self-sufficient and be able to live off the land. Mm-hmm. So I guess my question is, if there's a shortage of food, then was it because a lack of hunting? Or were people solely dependent on what they brought with them? Or back in those times, was it, no, we know we got to get down there, we need to hunt and fish and be able to provide for ourselves?
Well, yeah, and I think everyone was familiar with the concept of that. Having had to do that up in Canada, but the animals here were different. The landscape was different. The plant life, all the flora and fauna were vastly different than anything those people were prepared to live with. And his colony especially, that was their downfall, was they didn't have enough to eat. They didn't know how to harvest what we had here. It's documented that many of them died from eating prickly pear without removing the spines.
Oh, really?
So what that tells me is that I don't think that any thinking person would eat the prickly pear with the big spines still on. I think it was those tiny little spines that are on the thorns, or even on the thorn-filled ones. They still have tiny little,
the little green deals.
Tiny little spines. No, not the green deals.
So, the smaller ones.
Like they're 1/8 of an inch. Like you can't even see them unless you're really looking at the pad. And the people here, the natives, knew how to remove those. But if you've never encountered that plant, I'm sure they saw the natives eating them. And they were like, okay, we can eat that. And they just chopped it up and ate them. That's what I'm assuming happened. Gotcha. Because how would you not remove spines if you saw them,
Well, the other thing, it makes me wonder if that's a point where people are starving and they're desperate and they're not really paying attention.
Not thinking too much, yeah.
So it's a combination
so
of those
they
things.
weren't, they didn't have, most of the men would go, when I said LaSalle would leave every so often and go try to find the river again, he'd take the strongest men with him. So you had women and children left who were mostly gathering. And if they're hunting at all, it's small game. And he came here with about 300 people. And that, within the first 6 months, that was like chopped in half.
Of just death or people leaving?
Yeah.
Really?
And then by the time he went on his walk to Canada, there was just a handful of people left. And I died.
What was the Native American situation in that area? Was it I'm gonna screw this up, but it wasn't it the Tonkawa and the Karankawa that were kind of coastal Native Americans. Which one was in the Victoria area?
The Karankawa.
Was it Karankawa and was it Tonkawa and Corpus?
Aranama and the Tamike were the ones. Some of the ones that were known. There's more. There were many more tribes than are, especially the ones that are no longer around. There's no way to document everybody. Tonkawa were around, but I don't think they were right in that area. They were a little bit further inland. Well, the thing with the Karankawa was that they weren't in one place all season for every season. They would go.
So they're nomadic.
They would come inland during the summer and hunt, and then during the winter seasons they'd be on the coast and they'd fish and take advantage of the food by the water. So they were
really.
Yeah.
Oh, that it's funny. That's interesting because I would think it'd be a little bit the other way around. Typically, and I mean, things are different and for whatever reason. Today's hunting seasons are structured the way they are, but it's like here, if you're gonna, hunting gets really crazy in the fall.
Yeah.
In the wintertime. And I'd imagine being on the coast like that with no real shelter to block you from any northerns or any cold fronts or anything like that. I mean, maybe they had ways to do it in dealing with sand dunes.
Yeah, I don't know. And they could, group by group could have done it slightly differently. I don't know. I'm not an expert on that, but I knew that's one thing that the Spanish wrote down. So as far as the tribal ways, a lot of that information comes from what the Spanish explorers and priests, mostly priests. And this was obviously a little later too, because the mission priests didn't come till a little bit later. But
what was the what was the relationship between like LaSalle's men and the Native Americans along that area? Was there a lot of battle, or was there
LaSalle messed it up early on, and I think some of that came from his assuming that he could approach them in ways that he had approached all the many other tribes that he had come in contact with, especially the ones up north. And his last boat, the La Belle, went down in Matagorda Bay. That's kind of why they stopped there, because they had to.
Yeah.
He came to Matagorda Bay, and then he's like, I'm going to go off and look for the river, and he left everyone there, and during that time, the ship sank in the bay, so they had to stay. And as the ship sank, and they took what cargo they could, but remember, it's a bunch of women and children and just a few men, and so they couldn't get everything. And as things would wash up to shore, the Native Americans were like, free game, this thing came and now it's mine.
Yeah.
And there was backlash from the soldiers, and I think someone killed somebody, and so that angered the tribes, and then it was just irreparable.
Yeah, but at that point it hadn't been violent so much, I guess.
No, but LaSalle responded angrily and just took something he stole some canoes from the Karankawa after they took some of the goods. Well, they didn't see taking the goods as stealing because it didn't belong to anyone in their eyes. It was just floating in the water. They knew where it came from, but
Sure.
In their opinion, it was not anyone's belongings anymore. So he reacted badly and ordered his men to go take some of their canoes. And then from then on, it was a terrible relationship, and they killed what settlers didn't die from starvation were killed by the Karankawa.
Well, it sounds like early on in his career, before he headed to the area, there wasn't a whole lot of confidence in him. And it also sounds like there was a reason for that. It sounds like there was a lot of maybe mistakes made, maybe poor decisions, even to abandon everything and decide to walk back to Canada. I mean, I don't know what that walk would have been, but it probably would have been several months. And he's already broke. He's got no supplies. Now he's going to go through all kinds of Indian territory,
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like the best decision making.
Yeah, that boat that went down was our last tie to France. I mean, they had just no way of getting word to anybody because the only other Europeans around were Spanish, and those were their enemies,
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think there was some desperation. I don't know about the confidence thing, but I think there was a desperation of, I've got to make this work, or it's all been for nothing kind of thing. That's how I see it, just from a centuries away outsider view.
So there's a lot of there's a heavy French influence in New Orleans. Mm-hmm. When did that occur? Like who ended up
right before the? So he, in his travels down the Mississippi, as far as he did, he claimed that the Louisiana Territory for King Louis XIV.
Okay.
And there's paintings of him.
So he's responsible
with the
for
Chickasaw Indians, like
area.
claiming that land. Yeah.
Okay.
So he had successes, you know.
Yeah.
And the fact that this one wasn't working out, I'm sure ate at him. So much so that he ended up sabotaging, and it wasn't just him. He had some captains on his boats that were just not on the up and up, and really worked against him. You know, the LaBelle sank because he trusted it to this guy, and the guy was like, "I'm gonna try to drive it over this sandbar. However you steer it over this sandbar,
sail it."
Glide it.
I like the voice you were using for that guy a second ago. It was very, it's a mockingbird.
and you know, it wasn't a good decision. Yeah. And he was the guy that he had been entrusted with the last of their supplies, you know, and he made a rash decision to do something that he probably knew wasn't going to work. He was a captain of a ship before. He probably knew that wasn't going to work out. But he did it, and I think a lot of them were angry with him. In fact, the journal talks about discontent at how long it was taking just to get a colony settled, and so they were kind of like, "Well, I'm not going to do what LaSalle wants me to do," you know. And
so their confidence in him had waned.
Yeah.
Do they know the name of that captain?
They do. I can't remember it right now. Yeah, they do.
So it ended up the county's LaSalle County, right? What kept the Spanish out of that area? Was it just not appealing to them, or because it didn't sound like he had a strong foothold there?
You mean where he put his colony?
Yeah.
In Victoria County?
Mm-hmm.
The Spanish didn't stay out. So the colony lasted about 2 years, and then everybody was dead. And during that time, a few children were taken by the Karankawa and later found, and they were called the Talon children. They're all from one family, and they were later found and distributed. But some of them went back to Europe, some of them stayed here. But anyway, in the meantime, when he'd left and no one knew he'd been killed yet, the Spanish knew they were here because the Spanish already had established relationships with the natives in this area. So the natives were going back to Mexico and telling the Spanish, "Hey, you know, there's other guys. They look like you guys, but they're not you guys. You know, you might want to check it out." I'm sure it was something like that. And the Spanish eventually made it up here, but by the time they got here, the colony was depleted. I mean, they found the remains of a man, a woman, and some children, and they buried them. And they found his cannons. There was cannons on the boat. Those are different cannons. These were land cannons that he'd brought to protect the colony, you know, and they buried them thinking, well, we'll come back and get them. They did come back, and they established a colony on top of LaSalle's colony. But they couldn't find where they put the cannons, and they actually didn't find those cannons till the 90s.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But anyway, back to the colony. So what the Spanish established on top of that colony in what is now Victoria County was the first manifestation of the Presidio La Bahia.
Okay.
The one in Goliad.
Yeah.
It had about 4 technically different locations. That was the first one, and it was directly on top of the French colony. So the Spanish did establish themselves in that area and took it over, and the rest is history. So if LaSalle had established a French colony there and been successful with it, Texas would have been a vastly different ethnographical place.
How so?
You probably would have still had people like us because of the proximity to Mexico, but it would have been owned by France.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious because I feel like, and now I don't know the history from the late 1600s to this point, but I feel like a lot of the Central and South Texas influence is Mexico and German, like a bunch. And so, and maybe I'm confusing some of those influences with what is actually Spanish, but I don't feel like there's heavy Spanish influence. Am I wrong? Because I feel like it's mostly Mexico and kind of German influences.
Well, the Spanish were in Mexico and had established their presence there. Eventually, Spain let go of its hold on Mexico, but it established what a lot of Mexico is now. I mean, it wasn't...
I guess you're right. So a lot of what I think is Mexican
shaped,
influence, it's actually Spanish.
It was shaped by... And so we had...
Gotcha.
After all of that colony business, the mission started being established by a Spanish priest, by the crown, but the Spanish priests were flooding into Texas trying to convert the natives to the Catholic faith into the European way of living.
So was a lot of the colonizing to convert to Christianity, but I guess for searching for gold and silver and other minerals or material as well?
In my personal opinion, it was more about land than anything else, and that includes those things. That includes what's in the land, but
Right.
And it wasn't so much about religion, but culture. Because if you can get a group of people to live like you live, it's much easier to take over their civilization and meld it into yours. If you can change their habits and their culture to be your habits and your culture, and that includes religion, ways of life, dress, what you eat, things like that, rituals, then it's not going to be as hard to conquer them.
Well, I guess that's the only true way to really take over a property, right? You can go put a flag somewhere, but if you're not populating it with your people, is it really even yours?
Right,
you know?
And it was much easier to make the people here their people than to bring people here.
Right. That's interesting.
I mean, they did that first, and then they brought their people here. But
it's funny because like you always see movies and things, and you hear when they refer to like Native Americans back then as savages, but it's like the entirety of everything was a very savage way of living, you know. And it was almost like it seems like a very savage way to continue your culture, your heritage, and everything that's yours, right? It's like, okay, we got to get there before the French get there. We got to get there before, the Spanish get there, vice versa, you know. And it's kind of like the whole purpose is to continue your culture, your country, everything about you. And there ended up being a lot of death, and whether it was in battle or whether it was through trying to populate an area and not being successful and people getting sick and not making it.
Right.
It's in hindsight, now that we're several hundred years removed from that, you look back and you go, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, at the time, I'm sure it was anyone looking at it from the outside would have been like, this is anybody's game. Because not only that was happening, but the Native Americans were warring for the land. I mean, the Comanche and the Apache wars for territory had been going on for much longer before that. And the coastal tribes weren't exactly warlike like the Comanche and Apache, but they were definitely, I wouldn't say pushovers at all. I mean, they definitely held their own, which is probably the reason a lot of them don't exist anymore, because they didn't convert, especially the Karankawa. They did not want to convert. They'd allow themselves to be taken care of a little bit here and there, but converting the Karankawa was seemingly impossible according to Spanish records. I mean, that was like, leave us alone and let us live our lives, and that doesn't work when you're taking over somebody. So.
It's interesting. There's some other things that I've read and I've heard, and they talked about one of the things that made the Comanche so successful was their ability to navigate on horseback. And I didn't realize it because I'm a dumb guy from a small town, right? But in my opinion, all Indians rode horses. But it wasn't even that wasn't the case. It wasn't until I guess the Spanish had brought the horse, and the Apaches
in their modern form. They had been here and paleo times, but they are much smaller and different.
So they would have been, so now they're big enough for people to ride and utilize for moving things.
And those were brought from Europe.
So it was interesting to me that some of the things that I've read and I've researched, most of the Native Americans moved around on foot. And so, I mean, they would have had to have fought battles on foot. And I guess that's what made the Comanches so fierce, and they could cover so much more ground.
Yeah, I mean, they really adopted that tool better than I think any other tribe, at least in this region. You know, I'm sure the people like the Sioux and other people who are known for their horsemanship would argue, but the Comanche just were like, yeah, we're gonna use this and we're gonna conquer it, and they did. They were the best horsemen, better than the people who brought them here.
Yeah.
Maybe not the Spanish Moors, who were known as the best horsemen, but the Spanish were bringing their Moorish slaves with them here to Texas. And those people were becoming some of the first ranchers, and they were controlling the cattle that were brought in by the missions. So the missions were the first holdings of large head of cattle, and that's where our ranches came from, was the Spanish missions. They were bringing those cattle over from Europe in order to feed and provide for all the people they were converting and all of the colonization they were doing. And
so I guess that was another method to try and get people to convert, is feeding them as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. And that's when I said the Karankawa were happy to be taken care of a little bit, but they would disappear and go do all their own thing for months at a time during the year, and then maybe during some hard times come and get some provision that was being handed out. But what the priests were trying to do is to get people to live in the missions year round, and the Karankawa weren't having that. They didn't cater to that. But I mean, they didn't take to that. But yes, the cattle were brought here to provide structure, food, provision, and that just changed the entire landscape. I'm sure Texas was already Texas. It was like it was, but it wasn't huge cleared ranches as much as it is today, because the cows weren't here.
Yeah. That's interesting. Was there ever in things that you've researched or things that you've looked into, was there ever a time where, because the Native Americans were constantly warring with each other, was there ever a time where they put that aside and it was more focused on the Spanish or the Mexican or people moving into Texas, the Europeans moving in? Was it, or while they were fighting those people, were they still fighting amongst each other?
Oh, yeah.
There was never a peaceful time?
I think there was so many fluctuating groups going on that I'm sure all of them did things at different times. I know for the Comanche and Apache, actually, it's documented that they put down their different differences for like a handful of years just to get try to get the Spanish out as a united effort. But it didn't last long because they really didn't like each other. But they put aside their wars, just for getting these Spanish out of their territory. But yeah, so they go right back to fighting amongst themselves.
What is the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing, temporarily? Yeah. So where were the roughly where were the Apache located? Because
they were southern.
Okay, so they were southern?
Like they were southern Texas down into Mexico, from my understanding.
Okay.
I feel like, when you post this, there's going to be like 25 people within the first 30 minutes that are like, that girl didn't know her Texas history at all. So I apologize if I've gotten things wrong.
Well, I mean, this is the thing is a lot of this is just, helping me educate myself. It's a thought process, and it hopefully invokes thought in other people. And something like this where we're having a simple conversation between two friends and we're talking about this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Do we have all the literature that we need to
But there are people who do,
well,
and they are hardcore people, and I respect them for it. But I just want to tell them right now, I'm not.
Well, I would like.
I learn new things every day.
I'd like for them to correct us in comments.
That'd be great if they could.
Because one thing that I also enjoy about conversation like this is when people hear it, it provokes thought, right? Mm-hmm. And whether somebody is 100% accurate or 50.
Mm-hmm.
It still provokes thought in people to go do their own research and find out.
That's right.
But I mean, for the most part, we're in the fucking ballpark. So
that's vaguely what happened.
One thing that I found super interesting when I was telling you the other day, I was listening to some books because reading's for suckers, and I was listening to some books online, and watching some other podcasts and stuff. And one thing that I found interesting, because one thing that kind of always just digs into me is when I want to know why things are the way they are. How do we get here? Even as simple as music. I grew up in a small town and we were listening to Tejano music. I honestly had never heard of polka music, and I'd hear people go, "Oh, that's just polka music." The old white folks in town are like, "That's polka music," and it never dawned on me. And I was like, "No, it's Tejano music. It's from Mexico." And then as you get older, you do a little more research and you get a little more educated on things, and you realize this is fucking polka music, So then it leads you down the rabbit hole, right?
Right.
Okay, what's polka music? It's from Germany, Okay, well, we start moving.
Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia.
Yeah. And so, I'm from George West. I never went north of Three Rivers for the longest time. But then you come up here, and all of a sudden you go to, there's New Braunfels. You start heading to East Texas, a little bit farther north, and you start seeing all these German influences in the food in the town. And all of a sudden it's like, well, there's a huge German group of people here. So then you start creeping down the rabbit hole, and you find out, okay, well, what was the purpose of them coming? What was for land? Some of the things that I would listen to, they were talking about some of the areas. I think they were trying to send a group to Washington State because it was very similar to the country that they lived in, So they were trying to get to a place that was similar to where they came from. But then I also heard how the Mexicans ended up offering free land to a lot of these people because at a certain point, their conflict with the Cherokee became so great, they literally wanted a buffer.
Right.
And it's funny because you always hear people talk and complain about things, and everybody gets on bandwagons. And one thing that always drives me crazy is when people like to act like they know more than everybody else. They go, well, this was Mexico before. This is, and you always hear people, talk about stolen land and this, that, or the other. And one thing that I always find it fascinating is it's not that simple. It's not, hey, somebody showed up and pushed somebody else off. And one thing that I found super interesting was a few rabbit holes I've gone down. They talk about how the Mexicans were using a lot of the German immigrants as buffers between them and the Comanche. Mm-hmm. And at a certain point, the German population and some of the other folks that moved into Texas kept asking Mexico for help to defend against the Cherokee. Well, that wasn't the purpose of them being there. The Mexicans wanted them to be the buffer.
Yeah.
So Mexico wouldn't provide them the help. And at a certain point, they said, well, fuck you, Mexico. We're going to do our own thing, and we're going to, and that's where maybe the book, The Texas-Mexican War, came in. I haven't read it yet. So.
Yeah, I think, I noticed that it starts with the impresarios, so it goes back to the early landholders, that were aristocrats.
Who were they?
I'm not exactly sure.
So so they were aristocrats. They could have been maybe politicians or maybe landholders.
Spanish aristocrats that were, their families had settled here. I mean, that's how Victoria started, was a Spanish colony, basically, the De Leon colony. Mm. So from that, eventually Spain dissolved its interest in Mexico, and then you're left with Spanish aristocrats who had started their political careers here or had established themselves politically, and they either stayed here and became Mexican politicians, or they went back to Spain. I don't think a lot of them went back to Spain. I that's just my opinion. I actually have no idea what actually happened, but I don't feel like it. I think it's something uniquely a mix of the Spanish and native peoples that makes Mexico what it is now. It wasn't before that. It was something completely different. And it's not exactly Spain. It's not exactly whatever else. It's what they made it, what made it work for them,
So let me ask you this. It sounds interesting because you talk about how the Spanish start moving into Texas, and a lot of it is resources and land. At this point in whatever time period it is, the Spanish have been in Mexico probably a long time, and it's almost as if it's saturated with this new culture, like you're talking about. That's a blend of native Mexicans and the Spanish, and now you've had generations of children. You got a lot of light-skinned Spanish-talking people down there, and so now it's similar to like the initial exploration for the Spanish, right? So they leave Spain to go find new territory, and it turns out to be Mexico. And now Mexico's become what they've created it, and now it's time to explore more. And that's when they, I guess, started heading north. But in the meantime, now you have the French here, and you have at this point, I guess the English have populated the East Coast, and so everybody's in the interior.
And people are heading west regardless of the river, and they're pushing west, and it's all cultures. We hear a lot of the German and the Irish settled a big part of Texas, but it was all the cultures. They were just kind of exploring new places that weren't taken, and a lot of that didn't work out for them. It was dangerous. It was dangerous territory, but it made Texas the unique blend of peoples that it is. And there was a portion of my family. It's the Irish. My mom is mostly German and Irish, and the Irish family that we came from, the Kilos. Part of them, there was a family with boys, and part of the boys came here to start new lives, and one or two stayed behind. And we came from the ones that stayed behind. They eventually came, but the ones that came established themselves, and they, were promised land in this new place that is now Texas, but basically given no protection. It's like, yeah, take what you want, and settle it, but you're on your own. And they were all massacred. There's a monument to them in East Texas, so that's part of my story. It's not my story. It's just so far removed from me, but it was my family, ancestors. Yeah. Were part of those people that came here and tried to make this what it is now. And that's really fascinating to me that there were so many groups like that, so many families trying to just forge a way in this really wild territory. And it wasn't just Native Americans, it was Mexicans and white people who were here just for trading and taking advantage of other people. It was all kinds of people here that were making it dangerous as well as making it welcoming. It wasn't all good and all bad. It was just a mixture of all these really desperate people trying to survive and make lives in this really wild territory. And I think Texas has this attitude. You said Texas is the only state that mattered. I'm not exactly sure what you said. It was something like that.
Yeah, it was accurate.
I feel like we forged our state. I say we, but we forged our state in a way that was, I don't even have the words for it. It was so different than other places. The way we had to make this place what it is was violent and passionate and desperate, but also genuine and just, I don't know. Well, how would you describe it?
Well, I think you're being fairly accurate. You're right, because in putting thought into it, there's a lot of the desperation that you talk about. It's interesting because when I think about the Spanish, I think about the French, I think about the German and the Mexicans, and you think about the Irish and the Native Americans, and it's like, I'm sure this could have happened in other states.
Sure,
but it seems like
it did to an extent.
It seems like it's this crucible of
right.
Everybody in their own buckets, but experiencing the same thing, trying to achieve the same thing.
Right.
And it's interesting because what you end up with before the Californians got here is a state full of people who are very different, but with similar experiences. Mm-hmm. And now it's no longer, hey, this is some of the other states is like, well, this is a mostly Irish state, or this is a mostly whatever it may be. But now you've got this melting pot of people who at a certain point have to stop fighting and realize, hey, we're trying to do the same shit the same way. And I think what ends up coming out of that is the idea of being Texan, right? It's so funny because I tell friends of mine from other states, I'm like, this is the only state that I'm aware of. Maybe there's another one, but I'm blissfully ignorant. But I tell people this is the only state where you're Texan before you're American. You know what I'm saying?
That's true.
It's like you go anywhere and it's like, well, I'm an American and I live in Philadelphia, or I'm American, I live in New Jersey. It's like I'm Texan and I'm in the United States.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's this. It's exactly what I just described.
Yeah.
It's several different groups of people living in their own silos, experiencing the same troubles, but trying to achieve the same goals. And Texas is a very cold state in the winter. It's a very hot state in the summer, and it's a very humid state. And there's so many geographically, there's so many differences, but there's tons of. You cannot live in a state like this, as large as it is, with so many different climates, extreme climates, and not be able to. You can't be from East Texas and pretend like you don't know what it's like for the guy in West Texas, because you both live in two different extremes.
Right.
And it sounds like at some point people stopped fighting each other and they became Now there was still a whole lot of fighting.
Yeah.
But it was always super interesting because, like, I guess during the Alamo, what is that, early 1800s or something. They always talked about like the Tejanos, and I think the Tejanos were still Mexican, but they grew up here.
They didn't want to be under Mexican rule,
right?
Which is a whole other group of people, that hadn't existed before, because by then the Spanish rule had just gotten really, really bad, and that was like the beginning of the end, and they basically would rather fight for whatever was here than be under Santa Anna and other rotten aristocrats that were running the place. So,
and I mean, they were terrible to all people, but I had read some, maybe I've heard it because the readings for suckers, but how when Mexico could get a hold of the Tejanos, they were brutal to them because they saw them as traitors. And it's so interesting because this is that gradual progression for people going, no, I'm Texan. I'm not Mexican anymore. I'm not. I'm Texan first. And it's funny because you go to different parts of the state and there's different kinds of Texans. We grew up in Central and South Texas, which is a lot different than people
small rural towns.
Small rural communities. Which is a lot different than somebody who might live in Fort Worth or Dallas.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting because even inside Texas, you have these large swaths of land where it's like, you and me meeting as older teens or early 20s, we were still very similar, because we grew up 2 hours apart, but in very similar conditions, and it's funny how all that makes you part of this larger thing that is Texas.
Right. And and I've been overseas a few times, and I haven't been to many other states, mostly just south and southeast and southwestern. But it's either really regarded or it's really resented.
Oh, a lot of people resent it.
Yeah. And I didn't think about that until I went to grad school in another state, and I wasn't prepared for the people who resented it,
What was their basis?
Well, why do y'all think you're better than everyone else? I'm like,
because we are.
No, of course, me being polite, I'm like, I don't think I'm better than anyone else. I just come from Texas, and even the relationship I had when I was there, the worst insult he thought he could throw at me at the end was, "You just want trying to get me to go to Texas." And I'm like, well, why wouldn't you want to come to Texas? I mean, that was in my head. Like,
I tell everybody it's a terrible place. Don't come.
It's a great place to live. Like, why wouldn't you want to come to Texas? Davy Crockett did. Anyway, but I started thinking about, I don't see other states, and I'm sure there are, but I don't see a whole lot of other states with like everything they sell is in the shape of their state,
Right.
like us. And there is. I've seen other things.
Florida's very
but
proud,
it's not,
but it looks like a wiener. So.
Yeah, but it's not as effective.
Right.
You know, I think we have a cool shape.
Yeah.
It works well for coasters and
We sound like
bowls
those. We sound like those people that go, I don't know what team I'm going for, but they have pretty uniforms.
I mean, what if we were like Idaho or something? Idaho's a great state, I'm sure, but it doesn't work well for a wind chime.
You know, one thing that I tell people that's very interesting, even just within the state of Texas, is like the white people are very different. You know, and it's like when you hang out with a white guy that's from Central or South Texas, it's very different from somebody up in Waco or Fort Worth or Dallas, or you know what I'm saying. It's there's that, I guess, Spanish or Mexican influence. Mm-hmm. You know, it's permeated into the culture, and it's very strange because, you know, when you talk about South Texas or you talk about Central Texas, and when I'm saying that, it's everything south of Austin. You know, South Austin gets super weird.
There's a fox.
There's 2 foxes. That's pretty cool.
Sorry, that was really beautiful.
No, that is cool. Only in Texas.
Only in Texas.
But you know, there's a lot of flavor that comes from that. And what's kind of cool is even just within Texas, you know, you start going to the East Texas, and you start getting the Louisiana flavor that kind of seeps in there, and then the rest of Texas is like, well, you want Oklahoma to stay on the other side of the river, and New Mexico is a little dirty, so stay over there as well, you know. But when you talk about the coastal area, and you talk about like East Texas, you talk about South Texas, you know, you get these cultural overflows, and it's just a totally different. It's very similar to how you described Mexico now, that it's different than what it was before the Spanish got there, and it's not Mexico anymore. It's not Spain. It's a combination of what was built there, and it's very interesting because that happened in Texas, and it continues to happen in parts of Texas, and it just works so well. And it's so funny because when people get irritated and they say, "Well, why you're too proud of the state that you live in," and it's like, "Well, stay out, don't
right."
Come.
I once heard this, and this is in no way, well, maybe a little bit. It's in some way slamming Austin, but
Austin.
And there's good part. There's great parts of Austin, but it's
the parts that you leave.
Anyway, I'm just gonna stop right there. But I heard someone from Austin once say they had to go down to visit some family member down in, I don't know, probably the valley or something. So they had to go a long ways through a lot of small towns. And they were very annoyed with the rest of Texas. And they said, you know, living here, I always forget that that there's a whole lot other Texas than Austin, and that, you know, it's very different from here. And I just remember thinking, yeah, we do our best to forget that y'all exist too. I didn't say it, but I wanted to. But I thought, how come y'all live here? Like, that's not how everybody else
Well, you know what? You know what the problem, and I'm going to sound super ignorant right now, but I don't give a shit because it's late at night. This is the problem with people from Austin.
I was not trying to start a smack talking war.
This is a disclaimer that Claudia has nothing to do with this statement. But this is the problem with people from Austin. They're too clean. They try to be too clean. What Texas is, and not to sound cheesy, but Texas is grit. Texas is dirty. Mm-hmm. Texas is rough. Mm-hmm. Texas is inappropriate. Texas is unapologetic. Mm-hmm. And it's offensive.
Yes, it is.
Proudly offensive. And that's what Austin forgets.
Yes.
And that's what Austin lacks. They polish everything up, and all of a sudden it's like, we're from Texas, and look how clean we are. You know, but that's not what Texas is. Texas is torn up cowboy boots and dirty cowboy pants, and, you know, the smell of cow shit in the air, and aggressive people, and people that are...
But people who would lay down their lives for you.
Absolutely.
And feed you for months until you can get on your feet, and
absolutely
take your children in if you died in a car accident, and, you know, all this stuff that, I mean, most people I've met from here would do that.
Yeah. 100%. I think one thing that is when I think about people from Texas is our first interaction is very positive and polite, but we will tell you to go fuck yourself if you need to hear it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's what Austin lacks.
Yeah.
Is it lost forever? Not necessarily, but it's pretty fucking close. Well, Claudia, it's late.
Okay.
And we've done about an hour and 20 minutes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I thank you for the history lesson.
Of course.
I think we'd probably revisit it again in the future, and whether it's on the podcast or it's just in the you and me talking, because I love Texas history. And, one thing that I always found fascinating was when we learned about it in school. When we learned about it in B County, I had one class. But it's super interesting. And I'm sure there's plenty of places all over the world that have even more interesting. But it's interesting because it's ours,
Yeah.
And when you learn about the history of Texas, whether it's in violent times or peaceful times or some of all of its warts, it's nice because it helps you understand what you see around you. And you understand, oh, this is why this is the way it is, and this is why that is. And you end up loving it all, even the ugly parts. So.
And I think that that this place, every place makes people who they are to a great extent, and it's definitely made me who I am. And I find it funny thinking we just spent the whole podcast talking about something that's not one of my areas of expertise, which is fine because I'm passionate about this place. But I also acknowledge that this place made me the artist I am and the musician I am and the person I am. And I'm proud of that. And that pride of Texas that people complain about, it's not about feeling like we're better than anyone. Maybe you are.
Yes.
But for me, it's like, I don't want to feel ashamed of where I came from. What kind of an existence is that?
Sure.
And if I love that this place has given me the life that it has and has been a struggle, because without that struggle, I wouldn't have become the human I am.
Yeah.
So I take pride in that.
One thing that I think people fail to forget is their country, their state, their county, their neighborhood. It's yours today. So a lot of people like to poo-poo on things because of the past, and
even the present.
And even the present. But there's always regret. But it's like, if you're unhappy with it, it's yours right now.
Yeah.
What are you doing with it?
Right.
And
that's how I feel about it. I used to be angry about the prejudice that was around me, that I felt around me, and I came from a poor family, so I have to do this only, and blah blah blah. But I kind of made a decision as an adult, and I was like, I can dwell on that and let that make me angrier and angrier, or I can look at the wonderful things that have come from learning lessons and from deciding not to be in that mode for the rest of my life. And those things that were hard for me and for my neighbors and my family made us hopefully stronger people.
Yeah. I talk to my nephews from time to time, and I tell them, I've told a few of them, I'm like, don't be nice to people because you're doing something for somebody else. Do what you do because that's the man or the woman you want to be, regardless of how other people treat you or how other people view you. Your actions toward them shouldn't be for them. It should be for yourself. Regardless if it's reciprocated or regardless of how people have treated you. It's like, who am I? Well, I'm a decent guy who treats good people good and as a motherfucker to motherfuckers, But it's like, well, if that's who you are, be that. Mm-hmm. Don't do it because you're expecting reciprocation from somebody. Because if you do that, it may never come. So don't do it for others, do it for yourself, but we live in a great state. And we gotta get these foreigners out of here. When I say that, I mean Californians. Anyway, I hope we offended a few people, and I really enjoyed the conversation with you. And
likewise,
you've got a wealth of knowledge that we're gonna probably get hammered on online. So look forward to it. Thanks for sharing that song, Claudia. I love you.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm sorry for being who I am. I think I apologize to you before I see you every day. Let me apologize up front.
I love you, Gabe, my brother.
I love you too. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Gabe Molina Podcast.